My name is Jeffrey Sidoris, and this is Process Driven. Have you ever sat down to watch something on Netflix only to spend whatever time you set aside just trying to find something to watch? It's amazing how often I find myself in that exact situation. A few months ago, Adrianne and I were scanning through the myriad of options, and a promo for a show called Blown Away popped up. Now, if you haven't seen it, Blown Away is a competition show that centers around glassblowing. 10 glass artists competed for a $60,000 prize package and a residency at the Corning Museum of Glass. We didn't know what to expect going in, but both of us were hooked from the first episode, and we binged the entire season in less than a week. The show is shot in a way that really allows the glass to be the star, and while each of the artists on the show were interesting in their own ways, there were two who really stood out for us, both in skill and technique and in how they approach the craft. One of whom is a visual artist and glassblowing instructor from Philadelphia named Alexander Rosenberg. One of the reasons I wanted to reach out to Alex was that I love the way he interpreted each of the challenges on the show. And in the few times that we've talked on the phone, I've learned what incredible passion he has for the material, as well as the respect he has for those who have come before him, and really the profound sense of joy he gets from sharing his love of glass with his students. Here's my conversation with Alex Rosenberg.
Please listen carefully.
The whole way this works is, I have a house, my studio's in the house, it's inexpensive. This is the way this is my system.
Right.
And without that, I don't have much. My partner just started teaching at NYU too, so we're kind of between New York and Philadelphia. So there's not really that much there's not much. We have a bunch of animals, we're not going anywhere.
Right, you got a full boat. Yeah.
And I love my house. Like Philadelphia, man. You said you're in DC, so you know what the kind of regional architecture is, with these row homes. And it's just amazing to me that kind of a degenerate like myself could be able to own a little piece of something and be able to
Don't the neighbors know who I am?
I know obviously they don't. Otherwise they'd be there with pitchforks and torches. You know what I mean? So it's really wonderful. And I think it's a lot of artists around here are like that, and I never imagined that I was going to just be artist as my main job, doing projects that I want to do, which is really what it's mostly been for the last couple of years. So that's pretty exciting.
When did that become possible, that was potentially an option? When did you go, I can do this? Well,
I had... You know what? I'm going to give you the straight dope.
Oh, don't do that. Give me that Hollywood thing. Come on, you're a star now, so you don't have to tell the truth.
Yeah, that's right. I'll just make up. That's what I usually do is just make up some stuff.
Well, I was on my boat, Jeffrey, and what happened was,
But so honestly, I came to Philly to do a full-time teaching gig at a small private institution, and it was that's what it was an international search, and I was fortunate to get the job. And then I got there, and it was just the institution, as many of these private higher education institutions are, it was in crisis. And towards the end of my time there, I was there for almost 8 years. I just started having problems that I didn't know how to solve. And it's like a relationship in some ways. I kept feeling this kind of uncertainty, and I eventually decided it was time to leave. So that was full time. I was teaching full time, and I was running the glass program there. And I just stopped, and without a safety net or another thing to go into. And honestly, it was a really wonderful, I was fortunate to really, right out of graduate school, have pretty steady. I started teaching and running that program pretty young, at 27. So, so it's the first time that I really was just like, okay, I'm just going to try to be an artist. And it was there was a lot of uncertainty, and the finances took a little while to work out, but it was I think the best decision, best professional decision I've ever made.
Had you been making a lot of personal work while you were teaching at this institution, or did that really ramp up after you left?
I was, and I thought I was making stuff at a capacity that was, I was like having shows, and I was making stuff, and I was, adding to my body of work at like kind of a reasonable pace. But the way that the output changed and the kind of opportunities that I was able to secure after leaving was really, it's been amazing. And it's really helped me kind of develop my artistic practice, and kind of, a lot of stuff changed. Man, I'm just going to do all the controversial stuff. 2016 election
right.
was a hard time.
Wait, what happened in 2016?
Well, yeah, right. Exactly.
That all went according to plan, right?
Yeah. No, you're right. Actually, sorry. It's just we're just trying to be great. And,
too soon?
Yeah, I'm just tired of all the winning, basically. Sometimes you just had too much winning.
Right.
But it was a weird time, I think, to be an artist, and a lot of people that I know were kind of struck with this existential crisis. Like, where does what's the utility of what I'm doing, or how I'm doing?
Where does art fit in now?
Exactly.
Yeah. Sure.
I started asking all these new questions in my practice that it took a while to kind of materialize into work. But I think ultimately I was able to find some kind of projects and institutions that really helped me explore those questions and kind of develop what I think of as like kind of the next phase of work that I'm making. And a little bit of that is represented on, some of the stuff that I made on the series, on the Blown Away series. But the other stuff that I'm doing is more representative of that.
Do you feel like now, with the series now having sort of been aired, has the art changed? Has how you approach the art, or what you're trying to say with your art, changed in kind of the wake of that?
I think, I don't know. It's weird. So I was just on this other phone call, and I was talking to a friend of mine about it, and I think I don't think I've even really figured out how to talk about it, but like, the show, what Blown Away has done for me is it's allowed me to sell a certain kind of work that I've never really been able to sell anything that I make, rarely. And my art practice has been kind of veering more and more towards, like, I find an institution that will fund a project, and I do the project, and that's kind of how work gets made, and how I get paid, like a little bit
more so than to the individual end user.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And it's wonderful in a way that, like, it's just given enough of an audience for stuff that I already was making, like kind of design objects, or just like little kind of poetic things that I think about, that I make in the studio, or like relics of my glass studio practice, like where I'm just doing it in there over and over again, no matter what, that people will buy that. And I haven't really figured out how to be like a professional about it. Like right now,
you want that? Oh, okay. Okay.
I don't know if I do actually, but right now, I just like post stuff on Instagram, and I say, I made this. Does anybody want it? And people buy it, which is cool. And then people also want to buy, versions or editions or like work that's in series that's related to the stuff that I made on the show, which I'm happy to do.
That show kind of came out of left field for us as viewers as well. Like I remember when we saw the promo for it, we kind of both looked at each other and went, glass blowing? Really? We just didn't know anything about it. My own experience with it has been so minimal. My mom used to collect like the little clear glass figurines that she would buy at Disneyland when I was a kid, that was all just made out of clear glass rod at the little booth that you would watch the guy work.
Oh, I know exactly what you're talking about. I feel like I might even have one or two of those.
Oh, she had dozens, and I systematically broke them throughout my childhood. Every one of them. Not intentionally, of course.
Oh, okay. I was thinking something
else. No.
We have something in common then. We like ruining people's stuff. No, I'm just kidding. But no, I mean, it's, I think it's interesting because, again, I've been having these other conversations. I was just on the West Coast. I was in Seattle, or north of Seattle at Pilchuck Glass School. And
with Janusz, right?
Yeah. Well, yeah. I visited Janusz and I was taking a class. I was learning about bending neon tube, which is awesome and exciting. And I can't wait to kind of integrate that more into my studio. But being out there in this center of glass, of kind of studio glass or I'm sorry, art glass industry, like American glass making, there's so many people that are so kind of connected to the world. And you start to, and it was funny because I arrived a celebrity, that was the one demographic where everybody, had seen, or most of the people had seen the show. So that was it was funny. But what it meant was people would come and talk to me, but their kind of opinions about the show, and it was mostly positive. But I learned a lot too. Like I learned that a lot of production companies, I guess, had started to try to make a glass series before.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I think there've been a few different attempts and false starts and things like that. And who really knows how one gets through and the other doesn't? But it seems like the one that happened, the reason that it was able to get through was because of kind of pure intentions or something like that. I think it sounds like maybe some of the early iterations wanted to focus more on kind of interpersonal drama or
treating everyone as a character.
Exactly.
Yeah, sure.
And that, honestly, that rings true to me, just from my experience with like what that crew and the producers and stuff were like. So I think the world has been trying to do it for a while, but you're absolutely right. I mean, it was this, for me, from my perspective, it was like this surreal moment where there's this thing that I think about all the time that I'm totally aware has no utility or interest to like the rest of the world. And then one day it just flipped.
Right.
And suddenly, like, people that I know, relatives, ex-girlfriends, like whatever, are calling me up and being like, well, like, how'd you learn how to do that 3-ended punty for the,
Right.
These kind of technical, I mean, maybe not quite that, but, this kind of really granular knowledge suddenly becomes commonplace. And that was really interesting. I don't know. That was just a cool experience,
Mm-hmm. Well, and the ripples that you can't possibly know or have foreseen. I mean, Adrianne and I went there's this little glass studio in Kensington, Maryland, and we have driven by it many times. It's across the street from where we board our dog when we go out of town. And we went in, and they don't have a kiln, but they do a lot of fusing of glass and stained glass. And it's actually a pretty good size business, and they've got tons of sort of sheets of different kinds of glass and remnants, and they offer classes and things like that. And we went in and we were looking around and got talking to a couple of the people that worked there, and one of them asked, what brings you in? And I said, well, we drive by it every day, and we just finished watching this show. And she went blown away, and I said, yeah. And she's like, and I said, has it affected your business? And she's like, oh yeah. I mean, since that show aired, more people are taking classes, more people are interested in it. So beyond just your experience on the show, you've had this direct and really sort of quantifiable effect on the industry at large, at least in the short term, of people being interested in this craft that you've spent years doing. And I think that's absolutely amazing, rather than just focusing on caricatures that these people become on reality television. You know what I mean?
I think that's so cool. And it's something that of course, like, I hadn't considered or anticipated in any way, that like, I'm getting all these messages on social media that like independent businesses, people who make their livelihood from doing like introduction to glass, like workshops, like weekend workshops, or make your owns, or even just like their sales. Everybody's telling me their stuff is remarkable. Everybody's having a good year. Like glass studios are having a good year for 2019 because of this knowledge and interest. And I don't think there's anything negative about that.
Right.
I'm hearing also like a lot of interest in people trying glass or the interest of like trying to do glass blowing as a hobby, which like more power to you, man. If you can, it is like esoteric and expensive, but if you can swing that, like, the more the merrier.
Right.
And I also think it just gives people more sophistication, looking at and understanding the material. I think it's great when people, even just from the perspective of people buying glass, having a little bit more knowledge about the process or the kind of
the work
nuance
that goes into it. Yeah.
Yeah.
I had no idea how physical it was, Alex. I had no idea.
I think, it's funny because I think everybody thinks when I used to teach full time, here I am, in these faculty meetings and things like that. And I show up looking like a chimney sweep, like everybody else has like, people have nice clothes, you're
right.
like a tenured faculty, whatever. People have nice clothes. Not this guy.
Yeah, black t-shirts with tiny holes in them.
Right, exactly. And I have like cut off shorts and, sweat and stuff on my face. And even, people would even say stuff like I had a colleague who was like, ooh, pretty bold with the cutoffs. And I was like, you know what? If your studio was like 110 degrees, you'd be wearing cutoffs too.
Right. Yeah, we don't all get the air-conditioned office or cubicle.
But, it's cool. I don't know. I think there's been this kind of booming market in borosilicate glass and like, pipe making, like art pipes and stuff like that. And part of the reason for that is that the people buying it also participate in it. So they have this kind of understanding of the process and some of the sophistication, the technical sophistication or the technical challenges that go into it. And I think that's another thing that the show's kind of done for the general, for the general public.
One of the things, I mean, if I was going to criticize the show, and I loved it, both of us did, it would be that I wanted to see more background on the individual participants, how you guys got there, where you came from, some sort of little sort of vignette of your life before the show, and maybe even why you were chosen for the show. But they they didn't show any of that. And we found ourselves sort of sitting there speculating, going, well, where did she come from? Or how did he get chosen?
He was clearly found, with no identifying marks left on a shore and raised
right. A boxcar just outside of Philly.
Exactly. That's obviously, see, now I'm revealing something of my own origins. But, I've heard a lot of feedback like that. I think everybody, and I think it's also great, that they made it really compact and efficient. And in the feedback is, we want to see more, as opposed to the opposite, if they really dragged it out and made it kind of grueling or hard to watch. And I was even asking, I was like, I have Twitter followers now, which I didn't have before, which is cool. So I can like, if I'm bored or lonely, I can like ask a question to the
I love that those are the qualifiers, bored and lonely.
Right. I can be like, do people watch glass blowing videos? How much do they watch? And it turns out lots of people like watching process videos that even aren't necessarily people that do that process themselves.
Yeah, it scratches that sort of ASMR itch where it's just
totally
watching these things happen.
Yeah, and so like I heard, and it's, I'm thinking about other stuff to be making, if I should be making like more little process videos and things like that to.
Yes. I'm sorry, did I say that with my outside voice? Was that my outside voice?
To put out there for people. But, people want more. And I think that's cool.
Well, where did it begin for you? Where did glass evolve from in your own practice? And I love that you call it a practice. I love that you have referred to it a number of times already as your artistic practice.
Oh man, well you have to, or I have to anyway, because to me, I love that word because it both refers to the act that you have to do to be able to acquire the skill and maintain it. Like, like the way that an athlete or a musician has to practice continually to be able to do the thing that they do. But it's also this kind of anchoring with a material, like one thing that I always come back to where, if you look at some of the other works that I do, some people might say, it looks like a one-man group show, or like, it looks like I'm kind of delving into different materials and processes all the time. But for me, all that stuff comes back together with this root, with this kind of anchor point in this one material. That's even the way that I kind of relate to or think about other materials and processes. So I love that word. But how did it start? I like, so I was kind of an unconventional kid, and I didn't
say it isn't so.
I know. And I was having trouble with lots of normal kid stuff. Like I wasn't able to finish high school. I ended up dropping out and kind of leaving where I grew up to go kind of figure stuff out in Southern California.
Was it uninteresting for you? Did you just not click with it? What was some of the reasoning behind it?
It's hard to say. I think sometimes, and it's a long time ago, but I feel like I've had these feelings where it's like, as I started to see this kind of path unfold in front of me, I just didn't want it. Mm-hmm. And I don't think I knew what the alternatives were.
But it just couldn't be that.
I just couldn't.
Yeah,
and,
yeah.
And I don't even think I knew that, if you asked me at the time, but I just was kind of like, okay, so I have to like do good in high school so that I can like go to a college, so that I can get a job, so that I can have a car payment, so that I can get dental insurance. And I don't know, it was just too much. I just wasn't able to do it like that. Yeah. So, I had kind of a tough time for a while, and that's fine. And I had, good people in my life that helped me and stuff. But, so I ended up kind of high school dropout on the other coast, and I was living with, I worked at like a gas station, and I worked at a group home, and I had a couple different jobs. I worked at a bookstore, and, I lived with a guy who was taking courses at community college, and he was bringing home these they were just the worst. Like, there's nothing to love about them. These blobby, these primitive, like blobby glass things. But to me, and it sparks this kind of uncharacteristic, like I wasn't, that's just not me to like see somebody did a thing and I'm like, ooh, I want to figure out, at least at that time, I want to figure out how to do that. But the idea that a person could manipulate glass in this way,
sort of change its state and make something different out of it.
Yeah. It was I was so curious about it. It was so exciting to me. So I went and I enrolled in this program at a community college. It was in San Bernardino, a great, really nice place. But it was pretty primitive though too. At the time there wasn't a lot of knowledge or skill. Like I don't think I knew that good glass blowing was a thing until much, much later on. And that's probably also in part to my own kind of lack of sophistication or commitment or whatever. But I went there, I took the class, it was really cheap, so I could afford it. And, I started making glass. And this is the other kind of interesting thing, or to me, it's exciting about the material is I sucked at it too. I sucked at it just as much as my roommate did.
Were you bringing home your own little sort of embarrassing blobs?
My own, primitive blob, and with no plans or means to really improve.
Right.
I was kind of, but I would just show up and do it, and I was, as so many people do, I just fell in love with the process, and it was Southern California in the heat, it was uncomfortable, and it was frustrating, and I didn't really, I didn't really like know any way to improve, but I just kept showing up and doing the thing. I think I took it for a few semesters, and and I didn't even know that I couldn't reconcile it with art making either. I knew that art was something that I wanted to do. I should have said that. Like I always knew that I wanted to be an artist, but I just didn't really know what that could be.
Right. So what was glass at that time for you? If it wasn't art, what was it?
I think it was just this kind of activity, somewhere between kind of sports and craft. It was this thing that I like to show up and do and just kind of flex that muscle, and which, I continue to do like almost 20 years later. And, after figuring out how to incorporate it in different ways into other stuff that I do. So I ended up going to art school. So I ended up getting my high school diploma and kind of getting back on track. And I ended up going to college. And there I was planning to be a painter. And I arrived, this was Rhode Island School of Design. And I arrived and they had this glass program. And the glass program was weird. It wasn't like a decorative arts program, or it wasn't even like what their ceramics program was. It was like the sculpture program that kind of dealt with this material, and they had interesting practicing artists coming through. The students were making very kind of varied and esoteric projects, and performance and installation and all this stuff. And I remember having this feeling. I was kind of like, I would regret not doing glass if I went into another program, but it seems like if I go into glass, I could do any of the other processes or things around. It seems like
with glass kind of at the apex of that.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So I ended up going in there, and that was really, I still have a relationship to that program and those teachers and things. It was really a transformative moment for me.
Did you see glass as art at that point?
Well, I learned to, and I found, because, I found more examples of what that could be. In fact, actually, I was just talking about this. I found this was before you could really, search art stuff on the internet, but so I would spend a lot of time in libraries looking at things. And I found this catalog of an exhibition, a 2-person exhibition it was Michael Shiner and Peter Ivy. And I think Michael Shiner had just finished graduate school at the time of the show, and Peter Ivy maybe just finished his undergraduate degree. And they were both doing these like incredible kind of poetic, unusual. Peter Ivy, for example, had a piece in this thing which I'd love to have actually someday. But it's just this perfect apex, this perfect kind of confluence of like fine glass blowing design, like observing and encapsulating the natural world, like all this stuff that I love now in my art practice. He made this thing. It was like a delicate glass sphere that stood on a little foot, and inside of the sphere was a little mini plinth, a little mini stand, and it had a tiny little hole on the top. And what he would do is blow a soap bubble into there let it sit on that little pedestal, perfectly framed by this sphere. So it's like a sphere within a sphere.
Right.
And then he'd put a cork in the top of it, and you could save it. You could save the bubble.
Wow.
For weeks at a time. He said he had read something about a farmer who like kept bubbles in mason jars in his garage, for observation. And the crazy thing about it is when the bubble sits there undisturbed for a long time, just because of gravity, the molecules that make up the bubble, they start settling down, and you start seeing this bubble is incomplete. Like it looks like the top is shaved off of it. And what's happened is that top part has just become so thin, it's invisible. Like it just becomes like one molecule thin of bubble at the top. So, so seeing this and seeing some of Michael Shiner's stuff, like just dealing with these kind of slow poetic processes and the mixing these different materials, and just like I had never seen anything like this before.
Wow. And that was the turning point.
And I knew that was, I looked at this book and I kept, taking it out and looking at it, and I just thought this is what I want to make,
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It sounds like that was sort of the catalyst for allowing you to see, I can be poetic. I can be informative, artistic, all of these things with this material, with this one material.
Right. And just realizing that this material, and again, like, I don't think I had the language for it at the time, but just realizing that this material was this kind of entry point to all this other stuff that I was interested in, like measuring and encapsulating the natural world, or like observing and measuring, like, every scientific discovery has been mediated by glass. If you think about it, like anything really big far away or anything really small, we've used like lenses and things, all this, information technology uses like fiber optics, and it's the material of our screens, it's just, it's everywhere. So it was really, it opened up all these possibilities. And I think, I've always had trouble saying like, this is the thing I'm going to be interested in. This is the thing that I'm going to do. And then this, this material, which, stays being challenging technically, but also has all of these kind of thematic options. It was just perfect.
Was there a particular piece for you that you created where you kind of, that was the transforming point for your own work, where you kind of said, yeah, I can do this. This is where I need to be. I can see the results of my own efforts.
Oh man, that is, well, okay. So there was one, I think there was like, the more art that I learned about and the more art that I saw other people doing that was kind of outside of this conventional, like figurative painting and sculpture, which by the way is fine. Like figurative painting and sculpture are totally fine. But
no disrespect to the people who are using the brush.
Like I think I think it's wonderful to like carve a body, make something look like, make a piece of stone look like it's breathing skin, and it's beautiful and poetic in its own way. But that was what I had access to, and what I was learning was something else. And one of the things that I was learning was this. I think I used to think art was really serious. I think I used to think art with like a capital A was like, it had to be about these big ideas, about
but you had to have some sort of reverence towards it.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
And I started finding more work that was really playful and finding that quality in myself. So for example, I made a project, this was when I was in college, when I was an undergrad, where I started making molds of change, of American coins change, and casting them in lead crystal. And I would use this silvering process. It's like a chemistry, how you put a mirror on glass to make them look metallic, and they would look real. So I'd have nickels, dimes, and quarters, and they look just like real change. And I was paying myself for it. I was selling them in this way kind of at the end, but I was doing this thing where I distribute them. The nickels would work in payphones and vending machines, and I would like give, I'd use them to buy stuff at stores and things like that. And of course nobody thought twice about it.
Right.
But that silver coating, it was so fragile that if this disappeared into your pocket for a while, it would get eroded, and eventually it would reveal this transparent or translucent material. And then, people would have these, I imagined, I've never seen someone do it, but people would have this kind of private moment of like, holy shit, like, what is this?
Yeah.
What is this thing? Where did this come from? And trying to understand the materiality of it, and this kind of almost like this magic trick that unfolds to somebody. And I love that, this idea of this little, almost like a theater for one, or this project that's just this one experience for this one person. So that was kind of a big, making work like that, being able to just like be playful or tell a joke, that was kind of exciting for me.
Has anyone ever reached out to you since having found one of these pieces?
My friend, I recently have a friend who like brought me one and was like, yo, I found this.
Is this yours?
In the change of, and I think, I wish it was more, I think it was in the change drawer of like a person, in the car change holder of like a person who I had given it to, this like came from the same city where I was at the time, but it was still cool to have something like that come back to me.
Right. I would imagine there'd be something kind of amazing of you buying something in a vending machine or at a convenience store and getting one of these things back from whoever's behind the counter.
Totally. I mean, there's this other thing that I like. I like this aspect of storytelling that goes with projects, or like, I mean, the fact that, I can tell you this story of what's, I guess, conventionally like visual art, is cool to me. And I like it when the stories kind of come back to me, when I learn about people that have, heard the narrative of a project without ever actually seeing a thing. So somebody will say, oh, you're the one who like, you drove the cars on the rumble strip to make the song. And then, And I'm like, yes, I did. Did you see that? And I mean, of course I haven't seen the project.
For real? That was you?
Yeah, totally.
I remember seeing that project.
Oh, wait, really?
Was it Volkswagen or no?
Oh, well, so that's actually, yeah, there was a car commercial that did it. So I did it kind of in a lo-fi way.
Did they rip you off, Alex? Is that the deal?
I wish I could say that, but I think it's just this kind of zeitgeist, collective
Yet
consciousness.
another area where you were robbed, man.
I'm so glad we were able to get that.
Hashtag Alex was robbed.
That's my favorite. But yeah, I was like, this was in graduate school, I was renting cars and I was driving them really precisely on the rumble strip. So I would go faster, it would make a higher note, and slower would make a lower note. And then I mixed it together. I drove 6 cars and mixed it together to make a song, which was actually, I don't know, I don't know your age since we've only talked on the phone, but like if you're my age-ish or older,
52.
Oh, okay. There you go.
Yeah.
So you might know the popular hit "Sometimes When We Touch" by Dan Hill.
Who doesn't know it?
Exactly.
The honesty's too much.
People younger than us is the answer. But yeah, so like I played that.
That's the song that you went with.
That's the song that I went
All right.
with. Yeah, because it's like elevator. Well, now it's like elevator music. Now maybe they don't play it at all, but I was hearing it in grocery stores and stuff at the time.
Right.
The Muzak version. So.
Oh, that's comedy. Oh, that's so funny.
Yeah. Yeah. So.
And I mean that to kind of go a little full circle back to the show, that sense of not taking yourself so seriously when some of your colleagues, competitors were taking it very, very seriously, and no names, but it's you know who you are. The ability for you to be in this sort of part pressure cooker, part petri dish, and still have fun with it, and still stay true to kind of who you seem to be. Again, very short amount of time that we've talked, but who you seem to be as a person and as an artist is terrific.
Oh man, that's really nice. I mean, that's like my favorite feedback that I've been hearing, from the show, was that people will say stuff like, you just seemed like a nice guy,
right,
or something like that, which is like, it's cool because there is, glass blowing is stressful. And I think also like the history of it, like the shop culture of it, has a little bit of that kind of toxic masculinity that we're hearing so much about and talking about today. And I think it's like the job of kind of the new generation, maybe I'm getting like a little bit on the soapbox here, but I think it's important that, and it's not just glass, it's like a lot of shop cultures and like making traditions have this really kind of like macho shop culture, and
sort of the blacksmith kind of mentality of big, strong. Yeah. Yeah. Right.
And I'm here and I have my shirt off and, doing all this stuff. And it's like, I really want to, and I've taught for a long time. I just really want it to be like an inclusive space. And I want it to be like, this is for everybody, not just if you're like the loudest and can take up the most space.
Right.
And I want it to be a place that's like inviting of new practitioners, and it's like, we were all that like assistant to somebody else, carrying around somebody's stuff, like terrifying that you were going to drop it, probably eventually actually dropping it. And it was like 100% your fault.
Right.
But like somebody was kind enough to let it slide or not blame you or invite you back the next time. And, we kind of owe that to other people. So I think, it's a team sport,
right,
and we're working collaboratively in the space, or at least like as a team, we're working in the space. And it's like, we should be able to do that artfully in the same way as, communicate and interact with others artfully, just as much as like the thing that we're trying to make.
Sure. Do you think that gave you, I won't say an advantage, but a different perspective on it, coming from the educational background and coming at it as an instructor, did it give you a different perception of what was going on in that sort of team competitive environment where you've got multiple people working in the same space?
Oh, I mean, I totally had an advantage of just like working primarily with students because with teaching, when I use like the kind of institutional resources to make my work, I think it's kind of part of teaching to include students in that too. At least like that's kind of the tradition that I came from, and I think it's good. So, I guess like one person could say, oh, you're getting like you're using student labor, but I think of it more as kind of an apprenticeship element, kind of something that resembles this old world apprenticeship where
which we've kind of lost, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's great. Like that was something that I was searching for when I was that student, like the idea that I could learn something just by working closely with a person and less the kind of conventional idea of teaching, like where somebody stands in a room and explains to you something and you try it.
Right.
I liked, and I think I learned better from being involved in a process and watching it kind of unfold in front of me and being able to like ask questions or like have some hand in it. So like, I think that's valuable. But it also means I'm really used to this kind of deliberate and patient communication that's necessary to do that. Like working with somebody new who might not have experience, like doing the process that you're doing, and being able to kind of quickly introduce them to it and kind of explain it to them and, give constructive feedback to be able to accomplish what I'm trying to accomplish, while also kind of bringing this person along with you and kind of keeping them on board. So I do think that was like, think that was a huge advantage, actually.
Do you get the sense that the demographics forced the change in methodology, or did the methodology allow for the demographics to change in terms of who's approaching the field now?
I have no idea. I mean, things seem really different now, even from like when I was a student, or even from when I started teaching. I think.
How so?
Well, I just think the enormous and plentiful access to information and the way people are used to learning is changing really rapidly. And this idea of like, YouTubing a process and being able to go home and kind of repeat it. I mean, even from a reality TV perspective, people have used this example, like, if I watch a cooking show, I might, go home and try to imitate that
right.
thing that I saw in my kitchen at home.
Sure.
And it's not that far off from a possibility. But I think the expectations of students and young people kind of coming into glass are sometimes a little bit different than they used to be. I think people want results faster. And this really special thing about glass, that thing that I was telling you about, where like I sucked at it, my roommate sucked at it, everybody sucks at it.
Right.
Like, I just think that that's wonderful. Like, I love this idea that this material and process has nothing to do with talent.
Right.
Like, you might be talented, you might be brilliant, you might be rich, but
it doesn't care.
Everybody that is able to put in, if you put in a lot, you'll get a lot.
Right.
And it's true. I wish I hadn't have said rich, because like, if you're rich, obviously you would have access to more time, more instruction, and things like that. But the process still demands its due.
It doesn't care how much you want it or how much you think you deserve it. You still have to sort of earn that level of craft and ability and nuance.
Absolutely. And I don't think, and maybe other people have other ideas, but I don't think there's any process that embodies that more than glass. I don't know anything else that it has like such a steep learning curve, that has such a level playing field to start. So like, I think that's so wonderful, but I think it really turns people off sometimes in the beginning, like what the amount that's required. And I don't want to I don't know. I don't want to like romanticize like difficulty, but it just is what it is.
Mm-hmm.
Like I said, I ended up going to college and studying glass, and there are advantages and disadvantages to that. But one thing is that, for the money, you have kind of this time in your life when you have more access to the material than you'll ever have before. And I was so greedy with that, at that time, where I was like sneaking, I was like breaking into the studio before hours and after hours. And it helped that I had another student who was kind of had a similar
Right.
behaviors. So we were really able to, get a lot out of it. And I'm super grateful for that. And I know that that's not like everybody's trajectory, like different people have different ways that they want to learn or over a longer amount of time. But that's what I know. And that's kind of my experience of like what's required, to get where I wanted to be. I always say like with art making in general, there's got to be like something at stake, you know what I mean? Like for to ask people to look at something in the way that people look at art is like, it's a big ask, it takes generosity from the person to do it.
Sure.
So there has to be, you have to be willing to put in something that's worthy of that.
Beyond just the making, I mean, we kind of teased painters and painting a little bit, but
I'm so sorry.
Sorry, painters. As a viewer, as a collector, as a fan of art, do you feel more of a personal connection with other people's glass than you do other types of art?
Oh, man. Well, see, that's so interesting because like glass has this culture around it that you end up getting this collection just by kind of being a part of the world. So a lot of times there's this tradition of kind of cup making or goblet making where, these little objects are a forum for this kind of technical expression. You can show a lot of tricks in a small thing. So it's very common for people to, give you a goblet or a cup as like a thank you, or when they visited, if you're working in the same studio. So, and a lot of times you're there for it. So I have a lot of these objects where, I mean, in some ways it's like the show, where it's not just having an object, but it's having this record of this narrative that you saw unfold around you. There was this, in fact, actually, this is kind of a good one. So one of the guys that I got to study from, who's no longer with us, his name's Elio Quarisa. He was a Venetian glassmaker, a really nice man who came to the States a lot to teach young people like myself. And he was actually the first guy that I ever saw blow glass like precisely, who came to that community college when I was learning to do it. So this was towards the end, and I saw him come, and he did all these crazy things. And I was like, just such a, I wasn't able to access any of the technology that he was showing. Like I could watch it and marvel at it. There was no way that I couldn't
relate to its creation.
Yeah. So I was trying to make something, I don't even know what. And, I was kind of like blowing by myself, which isn't really what, I typically do now. And I had like a bunch of ugly colors like slapped together and making this big thing. And, of course it wasn't right. And my thing broke. And he was there, and he helped me like pick up the little
in the studio with you.
Yeah. He was around. I mean, he was just walking through, I think it was in between, he was there for a few days, and he was kind of in between stuff. And he just came in selflessly and just kind of helped me pick up the broken pieces of all the expensive color that I just wasted and dropped on the floor, and heat them up and pick them up together and make a new thing out of it. Like, and he really, it wouldn't have happened without his hand, in the process. And, so I got this thing, which I have somewhere in my house that, it's not just this ugly, colorful object, but it's this whole story. And
there's a provenance to it.
Yeah, exactly. Later, I saw him again. He was teaching at Corning, and I was, I had some skill at this point, and I made him something. I just gave it to him as kind of a gift, and he took that piece, stuck it in a kiln to heat it up, and made a base for it, put it on top, and gave it back to me. So So I have these two. Yeah, it was
Wow.
it's just nice. I don't know. He's just a really nice man. And I have these two objects that kind of bookend,
What a gift. What an incredible gift. Not just the gift itself, but the experience of it, the context in which it was allowed to happen.
Yeah, he's a really, just a really generous guy. And he loved, he was of this kind of crop of Venetian glassmakers that were really generous, and they were really, transgressive to come over and start teaching people stuff that, really nobody had done so much before them.
Is that sense of generosity pervasive in the glassmaking community? Are there techniques or things that people keep pretty close to their chest, or is it a very open and kind of collaborative group as a whole?
Oh man, well, I will express some prejudice here again, so I'm sure I'm going to offend somebody, if it gets to right
again.
Place. But like,
it's not the painters, is it? We need to give them a break.
Not the, painters, you get a pass on this one. But if it is my opinion that like, where we're at collectively, kind of culturally and artistically, is like, if your work requires some kind of technical trick that nobody knows, like if that's how you're I think that's BS. I just don't think that's enough. And information is so plentiful and so many people are good at this stuff now. Somebody's going to figure it out anyway. You know what I mean? So like, I think overwhelmingly there is like a very generous kind of attitude among the community. And I was just at Pilchuck Glass School, and everybody's just teaching. In fact, just by participating in the glass community, you become a teacher. It's just it's just what you do. When you first learn something, there's somebody else who's, struggling through that same thing, and you can literally immediately turn around and teach it to them. So like overwhelmingly, only have I encountered a tiny, tiny cross section of people who I'd like, out of curiosity, say, oh, well, how's blah, blah, blah. And they'd say, well, I'm not telling you, I mean, it's just, wow. It's very rare. And I think.
Were any of those people on the show? Don't say. No, go ahead and say.
No, nobody like that. Nobody like that. I did get, oh, wow, we're going to do all the kind of dramatic stuff. I did get some flack, but I'm going to call, I'm sure he's not listening, but like, there was a former teacher of mine who got in touch with me after watching the show and claimed one of the techniques that I used, which was something that he taught me, but he was kind of like, man, you're using that a lot. And, I hope you're innovating. Basically, he was calling me out for like using his glassblowing technique.
Wow. Did he want like a byline of credit or something?
Yeah, I don't know.
This technique brought to you by?
to me, like, it's not a secret that, I learn what other people showed me, and I don't.
You're all on the shoulders of giants on some level, aren't you?
I don't claim to really innovate anything technically, and also for context, like he was my teacher, so in a weird way, wouldn't it be like?
Isn't that your job?
Yeah, like he's calling me up to be like, I'm angry that I did a good job of teaching you. And you can do the stuff that I was trying to get you to do. Anyway, it was just a weird, funny experience. But no, but I think that's what this is. And different people will have different theories about it. But, I think it's like, I play guitar. I'm not wonderful at it, but I play guitar, and I used to play in bands and stuff like that. And that's, to me, that's what learning guitar is, right? Like you listen to music that you like, you steal a lick from every performer that you like. And
who probably stole it from someone else up the chain.
Eventually you use kind of combinations of that to start to express yourself or have your own voice. So, I don't see why that's any different with any other, kind of technical pursuit.
Do you find yourself doing certain types of practices again and again to stay sort of fresh and tight, or is everything kind of a new exploration and up for grabs?
Oh man, no. I mean, honestly, like I think it's like it is really more like being a musician in some ways, where like I have this kind of repertoire that I like to move through, and when I get back into the shop, I really want to make sure that there's these certain forms that I want to, be keeping regular with, and there are certain
almost starting with scales, to borrow from music.
Exactly. And I think there's somebody known who, I can't remember which one, but I think there is a known glass maker who says who calls like goblet work like, practicing scales or something like. And I love, so this is this other thing where I kind of relate this practice in the shop back to all this other stuff that I do. Is I love history and historic research, and my partner is actually a historian. And I think there's, so glass blowing is a literal recording of a series of movements, right? Like it's this molten material that's solidifying over time. And the way that your body moves is the thing that determines the shape that it solidifies into, right? So if I go to a museum and see like a 17th century Venetian goblet, and I go in the shop and try to reproduce it, if I do it perfectly, I'm reenacting a series of movements done by this other person.
Wow.
Years ago.
Wow.
And to me, who I couldn't figure anything, it's an unknown maker.
Sure.
And I couldn't know anything about them. But being able to know that, like that I moved in the same way that this person did, makes this kind of connection through time that is, to me, is just like so very exciting. And that's another thing. I don't know. It's just something that I love about this process so much, is being able to have these kind of connections, I guess, for lack of a word, by practicing something in the same way that somebody else had.
That's phenomenal. I had no idea that it was almost not choreographed, but it is sort of that, to borrow that, it's a dance in a sense where you have to be able to be as fluid and as precise and as on point as the people that came before you in order to achieve the similar results.
Totally. And I think I think it's kind of useful sometimes to think about the glass making process in that way, as this kind of like performance or like a dance or something like that, to really see it as just kind of like, maybe like a glass object is a glass object, but a glass object can be like a record of a performance, like, it can be like a record of a series of movements. You always end up seeing stuff because it's spinning. You end up seeing stuff that looks like it could be played back like a record, or something like that.
Right. Have the materials?
I'd love to do. If you could
wait, say that again.
On. Well, I was just going to say, like, which I'd love to do. Like if you could put a goblet on a turntable and have something that looked at like the tool marks on it and played it back like a record or like a wax.
Oh, that would be amazing.
So cool. So
you need to figure that out.
Working on it. It's in the book. It's in the book.
Yeah.
I'm interested in this other process, which I'm not nearly as, technically in command of as like the kind of glass blowing that you see on the show, which is flame working, which is, working with borosilicate glass on a bench torch. And that's actually, I do teach that, in addition to the kind of traditional glass blowing. And that's probably more how you're like, animal figurines were made. But I love the process. And that's also like, the tools and techniques come from like scientific glass vernacular.
Right.
So like, I was hanging out with this guy yesterday who like, the stuff was just blowing my mind. Like he was showing me this glass that has this surface that's finished in such a way that it's like invisible, So it's like, you could only see the edge of it. You can't see the surface. You can't see the surface. And he was talking about this. He works at, his name's Mike Souza. He's like the head scientific glassblower at Princeton. And he was talking about the problems of working with it, where touching the surface of it ruins it immediately. So you have to figure out how to, manipulate it and keep it in an environment where you never touch it.
Wow.
For these like optical things way outside my pay grade. I will never have to say like, and I couldn't touch it, or the scientists couldn't do their research. Like that's never going to be a thing that I have to say with like work I have to do. But I have so much respect for people. There's a younger guy, Kiva Ford, who works. He's the foreman at the scientific lab at Notre Dame, and I have had the pleasure of spending some time with him a couple of times. He's such a nice guy, but like he'll say stuff like, and like these prisms have to be within like 1 micron, or like the lasers don't work and the scientists can't do your research. And
you're like, yeah, that's pretty much the same with my stuff.
Yeah, same thing for me.
Yeah, same. Yeah,
same whatever.
Yeah,
So.
I sometimes let it go to 2 microns, but most of the time I'm in that 1 range.
Right, only if it's a guy that I don't like, only if it's a lab that I don't really like that much. He, by the way, just side note, like talking about people that do interesting things. Before he was a flame worker, before he was a scientific glassblower, he was a professional juggler. And we're talking like, I know, and it sounds kind of goofy, but we're talking about like, 8 things, and like one's a chainsaw. And
oh my gosh.
It's like really serious. I guess so. Maybe some people do have some predisposition.
Right. Would you have imagined that, however old you were when you left, that teenage guy that left, would you have imagined that you would have found this level of happiness and dedication and devotion to this craft?
Oh man, no way. I mean, and what a nice question, because that is like a really nice way to like I am so lucky to have a life. I mean, it sounds cheesy, but I'm so lucky to have a life that I really love. Mm-hmm. And there was no way to know how to want this. You know what I mean? Like you could only learn by trying and failing at a lot of different stuff. So I don't know. There was this really cool thing when I was, I guess, like a junior in high school, like before I dropped out, where I had an English teacher who I really liked a lot, named Ms. Kazamano, who like we're still kind of in touch. And she would do this thing where you would write a letter to your future self, and she would keep the letters for 10 years and then mail them to you.
Really?
And
did she mail you yours?
She did. It came. And so I don't know what it was. I guess it would have been like 1998 or 1999. So like 2008 or 2009, something like that. I got this letter, and it was crazy because my, 15, 16-year-old self was like, I hope you're not materialistic. You're not in this for the money, and I was like, don't worry.
Don't be one of those guys.
Yeah.
Playing squash games and driving Maseratis and whatnot.
Right. But, I didn't know what I wanted, but I knew that it wasn't going to make me wealthy.
Right.
But it's true. Like, to me, and, I'm so fortunate to have discovered this version of what being an artist is, because like I get to do different stuff all the time. I get to like research and learn about new things and new processes, and I get to meet new people, and I get to go places. And I really get to, I mean, it makes me sound like a dilettante in some ways, but like, I really just get to decide what I'm interested in and do that.
Right.
It's a wonderful way to live. I understand for some people that would be, stressful or uncomfortable. I know for some people, like coming up with the next thing to do is like, that's not the part that they love. For some people, it's like they love the process, or they love what the studio culture is, or things like that. And I like those things too. But for me, like having that freedom of kind of investigation and expression, it's the most exciting thing to me. So I'm like super, super grateful for it. But yeah, I don't think, that, I guess that's why maybe it's hard, when we have these, tracks for children, where it's like you get an aptitude to, I mean, it's actually one of the reasons why I believe in like arts education and like higher education in general, not because like, and the cost is a problem, but like not because it's going to groom you for an industry that you're going to be better prepared to enter and make a higher salary, but because being able to discover stuff that you didn't know was a thing,
Right.
And I think there's alternative, like I'm excited by alternative education too. Like I teach in these workshops and these different kinds of programs where you can explore, different topics and things without necessarily like seeking a degree. Mm-hmm. But I just like love that idea of just discovering something. Like think about, I mean, you don't know, all the stuff that you don't know that it could have been like your thing, or you could be like a prodigy in it if you just knew that it existed. You know what I mean?
Right. But you couldn't because you were put on this other path.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So, and I don't know, that's just for me, like it's like, I just love having the freedom to try out new things.
You can watch Alex on season 1 of Blown Away on Netflix. To see some of his work, including the pieces he did on the show, visit his website at alexanderrosenberg.net. And Rosenberg is Rosenberg. If you'd like to purchase some of his gorgeous glass, follow him on Instagram at RosenbergAlexander to keep up with what's available. Subscribe to Jeffrey Sidoris Everything in your favorite podcast app to get every episode of Process Driven, along with iterations, in between, and special one-off conversations all in one feed. Connect with me on Instagram and Twitter at Jeffrey Sidoris, that's JeffreySadoris, or on my website at jeffreysidoris.com. You can also email me at talkback@jeffreysidoris.com. Thank you very much for listening. I really appreciate your time. I hope you enjoyed it. I'll talk to you on the next one.
And this is just like other crazy exciting stuff is, we think of and marvel at glass as this material that's like manipulated by people, to these very precise scientific instruments and artworks and things like that. But it's a naturally occurring material, which we don't think about. And I'm actually, so there's 5 ways that 5 main ways that like glass occurs naturally, which is another thing that I love to talk about in a class. Or like I think I might have lost them in my institutional move, but I used to have examples of each one of these things. So there's obsidian, right? Which most of us know. It's like when volcanic activity happens and the stone becomes molten, and then it cools really rapidly, making it non-crystalline in this quality that makes things glassy. So that's like kind of a common. But then there's a fulgurite, which is when lightning hits silica-rich sand, and that's amazing because it's basically like creating a cast of the shape of lightning that you can hold in your hand. It's awesome. It's a tube. It creates this kind of gritty tube, which is really which is cool. And I'm going to try to make some artificial one. I'm taking a visit to do a workshop at University of Texas Arlington, and one of my plans there is I want to try to work with students to make, like, using a arc welder and a sandbox, figure out how to make them.
How deep, like when it occurs naturally, how deep are the strikes when it hits the sand? Or do they go pretty far down typically?
They're fragile, so it's hard to get one intact. But actually, at the Corning Glass Museum, they have a really big one set up that's probably maybe like 20 feet long.
Holy shit!
And it's all in sections. It's broken to bits, but like, it's beautiful. I mean, it's like looking at the root, the root of a tree or something.
Right.
There's some like Fibonacci math logic to it.
Yeah. Does it have a color cast? Is it clear? What is it? Translucent?
I guess it's determined by the quality of the earth, but usually when I see them, they're kind of whitish and
kind of milky.
Yeah, it's almost like sand. Yeah, they're gritty. So there's the fulgurite. There's a tektite, which is my like layperson's understanding. It's celestially formed. So it's like when a meteor hits the Earth and it's so hot that it creates a liquid pool of liquid sand when it impacts, and this stuff splashes into the stratosphere, and then it forms like above, forms above the Earth. So those are amazing and weird because they're formed, not in gravity, basically.
Are they more fragile because they cool ostensibly more slowly than like an obsidian? Well,
they're actually, I would say they're probably, I don't know. Actually, I can't speak to that with any authority, but they're pretty solid.
Damn it, Alex.
I know. It's okay. I'm going to go back and study.
Part 2, you best have an answer, mister.
We'll talk again next week. but there are these shapes that they form in. There's this taxonomy. So like one's like a little dish, one's like a little, like a turd nugget thing.
Right.
And one's looks like a little bone. I think it's just for the way that they're spinning in space.
Right.
So there's that, and then there's and then these are really good. Then there's like diatoms, which construct a glass shell for them. They're microscopic, but it's beautiful. They build themselves a glass house. But the last one,
but they don't throw stones. I don't think. I don't think they do.
yeah. But I know that's kind of a cheesy one.
Sorry, I couldn't resist.
But there's a sea sponge too that grows glassy tendrils out of its body and builds it. It's called a Venus basket, and it grows this like structure. It roots itself to the bottom of the sea, and it grows this structure that looks like a 3D printed lattice work. And this tiny brine shrimp goes inside and feeds off this algae that lives in there. And then it takes a mate, and they mate, and they live inside this structure. And then they grow too big that they can't get out of the lattice work. So they have babies, and the babies swim out, and then they're trapped in there, and they die together in this like last stage. And there's this tradition. There's like this one regional Japanese part of Japan. Well, this is a traditional wedding gift, which I just think is the most perfect, poetic, and kind of stupid thing. So anyway,
back up for a second. How is the glass created from the sea sponge? Isn't heat a necessary component to change the state of the matter?
Not in this case. It creates it
so
with its body.
Is it chemical then?
Yeah. And it grows it like hair. It's crazy.
Oh my gosh.
So these things are beautiful. I actually collect them because I like giving them as a wedding gift or just, whatever. Wow. And you can get them on eBay. Like, just check it out. Venus basket.
I've written down all 5 of them. Thank you very much.
I'm glad I remembered to do all 5. I usually forget one. So.
Although we are going to have to come back to number 3, sadly.
That's all right. I'm here for it. That's good.